Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Jason. I'm Technical Service Manager here with Leary Company. Today, I'm going to give you some training and a tutorial on our Monet user interface, basically our gluing and detection software. So we kind of snuck ahead a little bit earlier, but this is the product dimension screen. So you can see I'm on the third screen over, and at the top it shows me its product dimensions. Again, this is just the screen that shows me my learned length. So on the previous screen where I was on triggered distances and I performed a master learn, after that master learn had completed, this is where it would actually display my learned dimensions of the product. So wherever my trigger, whatever panel on the product my trigger is set up over, this is the length of that panel that it learned as we performed that master learn and the carton or the product ran through the machine. Right. We can manually enter these lengths if you wanted to measure the panel, but it's recommended to just have the system learn that panel length by means of the master learn. Now, we mentioned earlier during master learn, during the master learn process, you could very likely utilize the first carton coming through the machine to learn all of these features, distance and size. But if the first carton did have a problem, if there was something wrong with it, if it was skewed or if a panel ripped off and you didn't read a proper length, let's say, for example, trigger 2 didn't learn the proper 200 millimeters, it only saw 100 millimeters. Well, all of my stations that have trigger 2 assigned to them, glue guns 5, 6, 7, 8, are all now failing because I learned 100, but now it's seeing 200 on every piece going through. So I'm basically showing an error that trigger 2 is long, and eventually it will stop the machine because of consecutive failures. To fix this issue, what you could do is just relearn carton size. So when you relearn carton size, it's not like learning distances where you have to clear the machine. When you're learning distances, it's important to make sure the machine clears so we get an accurate measurement between the two triggers. But when you're just relearning length, you can do that on the fly. You can relearn length at any time while you're running. It's not like learning distances. Okay? So you can always relearn the length anytime you want while you're running. Doesn't require you to stop the machine and clear it out. You can do it at any point. It will also do it during the master learn process on the previous trigger distances screen. All right.
All right, so is that the little guy in the bottom, or is it the red dot up next to the trigger?
This little icon, the learn icon in the lower left corner, the little silhouette with the guy with the book, that's just to relearn trigger lengths.
And it relearns both 1 and 2 at the same time?
Correct. Yep, it will learn all of your triggers as soon as a carton passes underneath them. All right, each trigger has 2 icons, a lock, we'll talk about the lock first, and an overlap icon. All right. So the first thing we'll talk about is the lock icon. The trigger lock, I learned that you guys don't really need to use it. Because you're able to position your trigger sensor on a solid portion of a panel where it doesn't have to fall into cutouts or holes or openings within the carton or within the product. So if your trigger is able to read a solid full length of the panel, that's most ideal, and that's what I would recommend, setting up as. But we do have the ability to ignore cutouts or openings in the product by simply locking the trigger. Now, the rule of thumb is if you want to lock a trigger because it has to fall into an opening or a cutout, you want to make sure you manually, it won't learn the proper length of that panel or that product. You will need to physically measure that panel, lead edge to trail edge, and then just manually type it in. Nope. Okay. So once we lock a trigger and we manually enter the length of that product, all we really need then is for the trigger to see the lead edge of the product. Once the trigger detects the lead edge of the product, it will ignore any openings or cutouts or missing material in the product for the next 199 millimeters or whatever I program as the length. So that's a way for the system to identify that product as one piece as opposed to multiple pieces if there's multiple cutouts or openings in it. That's important when you're doing gluing and detection. We reference the lead edge of the carton to do all of our gluing and detecting per piece. Okay, so if the system is registering multiple lead edges because of openings or cutouts in the product, you won't be able to glue and inspect all of your events you're trying to program. So therefore, again, it only applies if the trigger falls into an opening or a hole on the product, you can lock that trigger and manually enter the length. The thing you want to keep in mind, though, is if you keep a trigger locked, it will never unlock itself and it won't learn. So if I hit the learn icon at the bottom corner here to relearn my carton lengths, it basically tells me those triggers cannot be learned because you have them locked out. So when you utilize the lock feature, it is expecting you to manually enter the measured length of that product. So you have to physically measure and enter the product length as opposed to learning it. If I unlock it, I could just simply learn the length. Okay. I got trigger 1 locked right now just because it's helping me with the way I've got the simulator program running to mimic what you guys actually function. So you guys would not normally have trigger 2 locked, but it's allowing me to prevent any flashing red errors from happening right now. So that's why I have trigger 2 locked. Any questions on the trigger lock feature?
Yeah. So if you have it locked, and you have it set for $199, and then a carton coming that is a bad carton that is half tore off, but then it sees the leading edge that is another 30 millimeters past this $199. From that point on, does it start its $199 again? So then every pack after that is off.
So if it sees the lead edge, the proper lead edge, it'll ignore anything that turns the trigger off prematurely for the next 199 millimeters. So as long as it sees the true lead edge of the carton, the true front lead edge, it'll ignore anything for 199 after that point.
Yeah, I understand that. So I have a good carton, and now I have a bad carton, and the bad carton is only 2/3 the size of a good carton.
Is it the back half of 2/3 or the front half 2/3?
Back half, so I got a big gap between my cartons.
Okay.
Now my trigger now is 1/3 off. Does the 199 start at the trigger? So then it's going to ignore the next good carton because it's not 199 from the bad carton.
So on your bad carton that's missing the 1 or 2/3 on the back portion, is the carton
front portion?
Oh, the front portion. That's a good question. So if the front 2/3 of the carton was missing, and I actually referenced the lead edge at a bad spot, 2/3 of the way back on the carton, your question is that going to bleed into the next carton potentially?
So everything after that carton now it's bad. Because it sees the lead edge, it's going to ignore 199 millimeters, so it's not going to see the lead edge of a good carton. Then it's going to trigger off a hole. The next
right, and it referenced that as the lead edge,
right,
and then ignored everything 199. Yeah, that could be the downfall of using the trigger lock. That's why it's always preferred to keep your triggers over solid panels if you have the opportunity to. That way you don't have to worry about utilizing the lock feature. But I see what you're getting at. If the front 2/3 of a carton was missing and my lead edge reference was actually the last third of a carton, could that potentially, what I would assume would happen is you would fail because of gluing and detection. Because you're gluing and detecting, you'd be missing detected glue because the glue sensor wouldn't see the glue that fell on the floor in between the cartons. It would so you'd create failures for your rejection. And then the question is, would our reference point of the actual lead edge then be kind of missed or offset at that point? That could be a potential issue if you're using the trigger lock feature. What I would recommend is if you're running product that's missing the front 2/3 of the panel, and we don't trigger the lead edge properly or reference the lead edge the way we expected to, I would anticipate the best solution to that would be to clear the machine out and then start fresh with a good lead edge again.
Okay.
So my understanding is up to this point, you guys have not had to utilize the trigger lock feature because you've been able to position the trigger sensors over solid panels and they don't have to fall into any openings or cutouts. If that is in fact the case, I would highly recommend trying to follow suit with that as much as possible and be mindful to have the trigger photo eyes kind of mounted on solid panels so we don't have to worry about using the lock feature if it's not needed. If you are using the lock feature, you can actually see that from the home screen. So if I just back up to the home screen, when I'm in trigger panel view, I can see trigger 1. I can see my live detected trigger length, my learned trigger length from when I did my master learn, and then I can see my encoder B reference speed. I'm using encoder B for this trigger. And you can see this little lock icon at the end. That's showing me that trigger 1 is locked. So if I go back to the carton dimension screen or the product dimension screen, which is our third screen in, and I unlock trigger 2, and I go back to the home screen, now you can see trigger 2 has that lock icon is now removed or disappeared, but the trigger 1 panel still shows that lock icon. Okay, so even from the home screen, you could see in trigger panel view which trigger has a lock enabled and which one doesn't. So the second icon or option we have with our triggers, trigger 1 and trigger 2, is overlap detection. All right. So the overlap icon kind of looks like an overlapped product with a stop sign on it. And when you touch it to highlight it blue, that means it's on. Something I should have mentioned before, throughout Monet, all of the white icons that you can toggle on or off, if it's on, it'll be like a dark blue. If it's off, it'll be more of a white. It's just like the main system alarm at the top right corner of the screen. That's the alarm off, rejection off, alarm off. That's alarm on. This is overlap detection for trigger 2 is on, and toggle it again is off, just so you know the kind of difference between the on-off statuses. So the overlap detection allows the trigger to detect a potential jam up. So we consider overlapped cartons as potential causes of jam ups on the machine. So it's kind of utilizing your trigger sensors as jam detectors. And what we have to tell the system is what is our tolerance for excessive length. So we can kind of see this little menu, this little value here. It's got the little icon of the overlapped product, and then next to it is a plus tolerance, plus 51 millimeters. What this tolerance represents is how much longer of a length does that trigger need to detect outside of what it was supposed to detect before it's considered a jam up or an overlap, and we stop the machine. So overlap detection is really intended for stopping the machine for suspected jam ups. So because trigger 2 learned the carton length or product length at 199 millimeters, we could say 200 just for round numbers. So because our trigger 2 learned 200 millimeter length for the product length, if it detects 51 millimeters greater than what the learn length was, it will stop the machine because of a potential jam up, because an overlap was detected at trigger 2. Okay. Just like the trigger or the lockout icons, the overlap icons also appear on the trigger panel. So you can see trigger 1, not only does trigger 1 have the lockout enabled, but it also has the overlap enabled, detection enabled as well. Okay, where trigger 2 only has the overlap enabled. If I go back to the product dimension screen and I turn the overlap icons off, I go back home, I can now see the overlap icons are no longer showing up on the trigger panels. All right. Now, I'll show you another quick feature here that a lot of people don't utilize very often, but it's here, so I might as well show it to you. We have an icon here that basically, it's a show all available triggers icon. So if I touch this icon, it shows me all these other triggers that are not currently being used with the system. Now, let's say there's an area on your machine where you just notoriously get jam ups, but you don't have a Leary trigger there to do jam detection or overlap detection to stop the machine when it occurs. Well, if you did have an additional Leary sensor and a cable, you can connect it to the Leary controller, whichever available trigger port you have on your Leary controller. Let's say it's trigger 12. I could turn the overlap icon for trigger 12, and then I can turn off this show all available triggers. I can unhighlight that. Now you can see I've got trigger 12 is now added to the bunch. Not only do I have trigger 1 and 2, but I've added trigger 12. And trigger 12's job is to only stop the machine for a jam up. So I can put that trigger 12 anywhere on the machine. I don't care about the distance from trigger 2. I don't care if it's after trigger 2. I just now have means of having an extra Leary photocell to perform a stop if it detects a jam up. It could be outside of the gluing and detecting application. It could be just before the rejection application. It could be anywhere on the machine. This is just means of setting up additional Leary photo eyes. They will not reject. They won't send you a signal to kick out product. It will only stop the machine if it sees a jam up. If you do not want it, you simply turn off the overlap icon, and you can see trigger 12 now disappears because it knows we don't have trigger 12 assigned to any of our gluing and detection application down here in the lower portion of the screen. We only have trigger 1 and 2 assigned to these active stations. So it knew trigger 12 was only being utilized as an overlap or jam detector, and it doesn't need to be there if it's not being used as a jam detector. It'll automatically disappear from the list. Any questions on overlap or what we call jam/overlap detection for the triggers?
I just have a question about the trigger learns here. You said when you do the global learns, it rejects the packs it uses to learn, but if you just do the trigger learn, does it reject those packs as well or no?
I believe it will. Quick test for you, Alicia.
I didn't hear you.
I'm gonna do a quick test on that. So I'm gonna do a distance learn. I do not believe. I think it's only global learn. I think it's only master learn. You notice that when I did the global learn, we got a little bit of a different message. Okay, so I've got my learn trigger distances as complete. So when I do a global learn, just so you guys understand how this works, when I do a global learn, so it's telling me to clear the machine out. Okay, so when I do a master or global learn, you can see where it at the end it says machine clear in progress. Whenever you see that message, it's basically letting you know that we are going to reject this product. As you know, the cartons used to perform this learn will get rejected out. So what it's telling me is it's going to utilize this machine clear menu or feature, the machine clear feature. Even though we have it turned off, it's going to utilize that machine clear feature just for the master learn. So the cartons that are used for that to complete that master learn, they will get rejected out just like we would if we had the machine clear feature turned on. Because we have machine clear turned off, it won't utilize the machine clear feature when the machine starts and stops and there's product left in the machine, but it will utilize machine clear to reject those cartons for master learn only.
Do those master learn rejects show up in those reject graphs as, you know, learning rejects? You know, the graphs we looked at before?
They will. They'll show up as machine clear. I get a lot of. So you see where it says machine clearing?
Okay.
This is what you will see during the master learn. So any cartons that were rejected during master learn will actually have this machine clearing message on it.
Okay.
So that's how they're recorded.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay, we'll go back home. Just so you guys know, to answer Alicia's question, I went back to the home screen. I went to the graphs and LEDs icon, and I went to the reject list. Now we've got rejects since we've been kind of running the simulator and changing carton sizes and doing master learn. So now we actually got things recorded on the reject list. A shortcut to the reject list, if I didn't want to go into the graphs and LED screen to go to this menu here, this chart for reject list or this list, there is a shortcut to the list right here where it says 0 rejects. This times out and clears out on its own. But if I just touch the 0 rejects down here, it's like a shortcut to that list. So you don't have to actually go into the graphs menu. So it's only a shortcut to the reject list, not the other graphs though. Okay, so that's right here on the bottom right corner of the home screen. All right, we're gonna go back to product dimensions, which was our third screen from the lower left. And any other questions on product dimensions? This is a screen that doesn't really get a lot of attention. If your master learn on the previous screen performed correctly, a lot of times people just kind of bypass this screen, especially if they don't need to utilize the trigger lockout feature or they're not interested in stopping the machine for jam ups or overlaps.